Welcome. Today I'm joined by Philippa von Ziegenweidt, who is a spokesperson and member of Citizens for an Accountable Megahospital Planning Process, also known as CAMPP. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
That's quite a mouthful.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you. I know we've met before in the past, and obviously the issues that are being raised are super important. So we wanted to make sure that they were on the agenda of the election as well. So on your website, it says hospitals belong where people live. Can you kind of elaborate
Why?
what that means, kind of thing?
Hospitals, I would argue, are the most important community anchors that we have in our cities and towns or wherever we live. Most people are born in a hospital. We die in a hospital, usually.
Mm-hmm.
We go there throughout our lives. 5,000 people work at our hospitals. So Windsor Regional Hospital is one of the largest employers in the region. In fact, I think at this point they are the largest with 5,000 people. And it's not just the employees, it's also the contractors who are walking in and out all the time. And we have volunteers in the hospitals, and that's without even thinking about the patients who, there's several hundred patients staying at a hospital at any time. So hospitals are very much a part of where we live. And that's why we believe it's really important that they remain within the community where we live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's of course important to be thinking about where we need infrastructure in the future, but we also need to take care of where the people live today.
So basically, obviously, so many people are connected to the hospital, and so that's the idea, that people not only maybe actually live in the hospital, but like their life is in the hospital, right?
Yeah, and it's been very interesting in the years since we formed. So that was in 2013, 2014. It's been a long time. It's all, the entire time that my children have been growing up that we've been busy with this. But I've spoken to so many people who live in the immediate neighborhoods of the hospitals, and especially at the OLET campus, there are many people who live there specifically because they have medical conditions and they need to be at the hospital in a hurry if something goes wrong. So that made it really brought it home to me how important it is to have hospitals embedded in the community.
Now, with the experience of the pandemic that we've all had, and that kind of changed the way that we maybe think about healthcare and hospitals and their delivery and that kind of thing, and even what is required for a modern healthcare system that actually addresses the needs of all. What do you think people should think about regarding what's needed moving forward after the pandemic in relation to the idea of the mega hospital and its construction?
Yeah, there are a couple of different things to think about there. And before the pandemic, the question had been raised by a number of people about, is it smart to be putting everything into one facility? A lot of people believe that we need more than one hospital to serve the region. And they brought up the question of pandemics and infection control because, if there's an infection in the hospital and there's only one facility, that could be a problem. And the answer before COVID was, that we can hermetically seal the hospital. We have different entrances. A pandemic will not be an issue at all. So it's interesting because the buildings that we have right now obviously are aging. They're not built to withstand infections very, very well, and there's some really tragic infrastructure issues on the inside. So I'm not minimizing any of that. But I think what we learned through the pandemic as well is that the building itself cannot stop the pandemic from coming in. It's inside you. I'm not sure that it's realistic to think that a new building is going to make things perfect if we have the pandemic all over, or what if it's even worse? What if it becomes even more lethal than this one has been? I'm really concerned. And I spent quite a lot of time looking at what happened in other cities that have more modern hospitals. So Humber River Hospital, for example, which opened in 2015, they also were forced to cancel surgeries. So they've had huge backlogs and problems. It hasn't been plain sailing in the newer hospitals either. And in Brampton, that was one of the first mega hospitals. They have also had huge problems. In fact, if we're talking about the pandemics, it's relevant to think about what happened in Brampton because they had one of the earlier mega hospitals they used to have a hospital right in the downtown core, and they demolished that and built an urgent care. So the model that they have in Brampton is actually very similar to what we're planning now, except they did it, I think their hospital opened in 2007, so it's quite a while ago. Brampton's grown, and they have found that an urgent care in their downtown core has not been the solution. So they're very actively asking the provincial government for a hospital downtown, in addition to their urgent care. And when the pandemic started, they closed down their urgent care, and it only just recently opened up again a couple of months ago. So if we're replicating their model, then we should be aware of how that worked out in Brampton, and we should be aware of, they're not happy in Brampton at all. Now, I know Brampton's grown a lot faster than Windsor has, but we're talking about adding a whole lot of new jobs with the new EV plant. If we're going to be attracting a lot of population here, and we're aging significantly, and that's, aging people typically need more healthcare, we should be thinking about the extra demands that will be placed on our hospitals, and whether we're doing the right thing. And I, of course, firmly believe we're not doing the right thing. No, that's fine.
One of the things actually that's coming up in the election is that idea that, like, oh, well, it's okay because we're going to have an urgent care clinic, right? And I feel like this move towards this idea of clinics, first of all, not being like 24 hours like a hospital, having the resources like a hospital, when it's like 8 o'clock on a Sunday and you need to go to an urgent care clinic and it's closed, you just don't have those services, right? So I don't think this argument that's kind of coming up about, like, well, it's okay because the downtown core is going to have an urgent care clinic, as if that's an answer or that's a substitution, because even that discussion hasn't happened, right? Like, what kind of urgent care clinic would be needed in the city?
Yeah, they keep saying, well, they're changing the language as well, and they're calling it an emergency department, a satellite emergency department. But in the language that on paper, it's been very, very clear that it's an urgent care clinic. And there's a big difference between urgent care and emergency care. And you cannot get the service, it's just not the same thing by any means, and I think they're whitewashing it. And it's very clear that they have made it very clear that it will not be open overnight. So if you have anything really serious, you're going to be routed to the hospital itself. But there's something else that has never been honestly spoken about, and that is when you go to the ER for treatment, we know that most people don't end up being admitted to the hospital overnight. So, if you don't need to be admitted, typically what happens is you get sent home with a referral to see a specialist at a later date. That specialist is not going to be located at the urgent care.
Right.
We haven't spoken about that publicly. So realistically, what's going to happen is you might go to the urgent care, you might get a referral for another day, and then you're going to have to go to where the Megahospital is for your further treatment. So you're still going to end up having to travel that distance. And for many people, it might be numerous different appointments in the future. Like, think if you've broken a limb, they're gonna put you together, and then they're gonna say, come back on Tuesday, and then you're gonna have other follow-up appointments.
Right.
So if you don't have a car, how is that going to affect you? And if you ride a bicycle, well, probably if you've broken a limb, you're not going to be riding a bicycle. But then what if you take a cab? One of the graphics we put up right in the beginning was the cab fare, the return cab fare to the County Road 9, the Concession 9 location. And we're looking at, if you're coming from Windsor West, you're looking at about $75 for the round trip, and that was 5 years ago. So I'm sure that with the gas prices being what they are, those rates are going to go up. How is somebody on ODSP going to be able to afford that? Somebody on a limited income might be able to do it once, but what happens if they have to make multiple trips? It's going to be a problem.
For sure. Now, the other thing too, and I'm not sure if it's known or not, but this idea of an urgent care clinic, is that part of a public development project, or is that an issue of like a partnership, private partnership? I don't think that's really been spoken about, who's going to be in control of that.
We don't know exactly. We know that the construction is to be a P3, so it will be a public-private partnership, and those are typically structured so it's less risk to the contractor, and so that is one of the reasons why they want it on a site that's flat and where the risks are known. But we haven't really spoken about what's going to happen in the downtown core. Is that also a P3? I don't know.
Or is it up to the whims of, like, hopefully somebody opens an urgent care clinic, like,
I guess that's possible. They did say that it was going to be managed by the hospital itself.
Okay.
But we haven't really had very open discussions about that.
Right. Which is a problem. All of this is a problem, to have these discussions as if it's a done deal and you just go and you do it, right?
The province has been heavily indebted since before the pandemic, and I don't even know where the debts are at today, but it can't be any better than where it was 3-4 years ago. So how are we going to finance all of this? Is this the best way to spend taxpayers' money? I don't know. And if they end up making decisions to build the hospital in a different way, partnering with private interest, they need to get their money out of it too. So are we going to be looking at private parking, private concession stands? I don't know how that's going to be worked out, and I'm not sure if anybody knows at this point.
So obviously the issue of closing the 2 hospitals in the city in exchange for the one proposed mega hospital on County Road 42 was an issue that CAMPP put front and center in the 2018 election. For example, you folks organized an all candidates debate where community members and candidates could ask questions and talk to each other, and then the community could hear about a candidate's platform or their party's platform on how they stand in that. And thank you for doing that. It was the only event like that in that election. And as we're kind of talking now, we need more spaces to have those kind of discussions, to distill what are the issues, what's the problem, and we may find out we have no problems, or we may find out we have bigger problems or different problems, right, for different people. And shortly after that election, CAMPP began a legal challenge appealing the Windsor City Council's decision to approve the zoning for the new hospital. Can you tell us what you learned from that process?
I may have been a little naive in going into this and thinking that if we had logical arguments, that reason would prevail. And maybe that was a good thing, because if you go into it very cynically thinking that there's no hope, then maybe you don't even start anything at all. So I'm very happy that we did what we did. We learned a tremendous amount about how to analyze data and how to put it together. I'm very proud of the work that we did. We put a lot of effort into it, and I think that every bit of effort that you put into something, even if you don't win in the end, I think it's tremendously valuable, because I think you see the bigger picture of what's going on in the city. You understand the power structures, and so I don't think it was a wasted effort by any means. But it also made me more cynical about citizens' power ability to speak truth to power, essentially. And so if I look back, if I were to do it all over again, I think I would do the same thing. But if I were more cynical about it, I'd wonder, was it worth spending that much time and effort on something that the city has completely ignored? The hospital has completely overridden, every single concern that we've brought up. But I am actually quite hopeful, because I do know that the public has been paying attention. It's amazing that when you see social media comments where people are really upset, you still have your sign, and I can see
a little worn.
And I went on a long bike ride this morning, and I saw a couple of signs along the way, and I think that's wonderful that people feel so strongly about that. So I'm very realistic about how this has been fantastic. This has been a learning experience for everyone.
Well, and I think it gave the community a chance to find out what's going on, because the amount of research that CAMPP was able to provide and really delve into and dig and like you said, learn about what the city looks like in terms of its healthcare and what its needs are. And that really empowers people to say, well, no, that's what I want, right?
Right.
And I think there was probably a lot of money spent to try to pretend like the citizenry was not on the side of asking for an accountable mega hospital planning process, but it's not true. Like, the facts are opposite.
We have never been honestly asked, what do we want?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously everybody wants modern healthcare. So when you frame the question, do you want a new hospital? I think just about everybody will say yes. You know, but that's not necessarily the question that we want to answer. We need to be asked, like, do we support a hospital on County Road 42? Do we support closing what we have here? And is this the best? And we should be talking about, like, is this the best that we can do? You know, the economy's getting a little worse right now. I don't know what's going to happen next, but you know, it's not maybe not as rosy as it was 10 years ago. I think we're going to be more scrutinizing more. Is this what we're you know, can we afford this at provincially and municipally as well? We haven't had any good conversations about how much this is going to cost municipally. I don't know how it's going to affect taxpayers, but we need to be talking about that.
I think the same argument comes up too when we talk about building new schools, for example, that it's this shiny new thing and let's build a new school, but in the meantime, as you're saying, yes, let's build a new school, 3 in the city or in your community are shut down, right? And they say, oh, well, we're building new schools, right? So it's not just a discussion of yes or no, like you're saying, yes or no new school, yes or no new, you know, mega hospital. Or new hospital in general. The issue is what kind of hospital, who's it going to serve, and
what's best for our community. Yeah, and I think in the 90s there was a big push towards consolidating things. You know, mega is better. You know, we saw the consolidation of the various municipalities in Toronto, and that hasn't turned out to be that great. There's been a lot of criticism since then, and a lot of things have not improved as they were supposed to. You know, the cost savings were not there. We've consolidated schools, like you mentioned. We've built them on the outskirts of cities, and so there's this assumption that, you know, that mega is better, the consolidated is better, and that we're going to be growing, you know, exponentially. And I'm not convinced that that's the right answer. You know, maybe mega and maybe consolidated is not better, and maybe we need to be looking more at distributed models. And I know in the States, the hospitals have been getting smaller. There's this concept of a micro hospital, which we've never spoken about here. But a micro hospital is different than urgent care. So, you know, I'm not saying that this is what we should be doing, but why have we never discussed a micro hospital in the downtown core? That might have been a better option.
Right. So where would you say that, where do things kind of stand now? Obviously 2018 was a while ago, and my sign is proof. But
where does it stand?
Where do things stand now?
Well, last year there were a couple of consultations on the floodplain where they're planning to build the hospital. So that entire area in Sandwich South is well, the rain that comes down there in the fields, it tends to pool. It's a bit of a floodplain, and if they build on that area, the water has to go somewhere, so they have to build infrastructure to prevent the downstream neighborhoods from flooding. And flooding in East Riverside has been a problem. It's a known problem, and we've built a lot of houses. So in the 70s and the 50s, that all flooded, and there were lots of fields. Now we have houses where the fields used to be, so the flooding, if we get a lot of water, could potentially be worse. So it's not an insurmountable problem, but they have to put a lot of money into the infrastructure to make that work. And so that's where the process is at the moment. So putting together the infrastructure plans. And where the consultation, I think it was in November of last year, they had mapped out, they'd done the flood mapping for the area as it is today. And several of the questions that came up were, people were asking, well, this is what you're mapping as of today, but what about when we build on this area? How will that affect us? And the answer coming back from the consultants was, well, that's the next stage. So we have to do that next. The first step is to map what we have today, and then the next step is to map the impacts once you've built on that land. I haven't heard anything further. So I'm hoping that there will be another consultation where they'll tell us about those impacts, and I'm hoping to see some numbers of how much it will cost to mitigate that. And I would like to see some consultations in those downstream neighborhoods. So I live in Riverside. There are thousands of houses, newly built houses to the east of where I live. So I would like to see some engagement in those communities so that people know what's coming our way.
And that's something even that hasn't really been on the discussion, right? Like,
No.
obviously when you do one thing, it's not in isolation of everything else,
No.
including environmental effects and all that kind of stuff too,
Yeah.
right?
The environmental impacts are huge. So we're talking about spending money on making the roads wider, even potentially putting in new roads so that people can access the hospital there. And so we're putting in more asphalt, creating more heat islands, creating more flood risk at a time when we have, well, I think it was it 2018, 2019, we declared a climate emergency in Windsor, and the county did as well. And we said it's not business as usual. Every single decision will be made through a climate lens, and yet we're going ahead with putting a hospital in a floodplain. It doesn't make sense.
So obviously this is an ongoing fight. The hospital itself hasn't been built yet.
No.
But at the same time, I'm sure things have been put in place in order to kind of go that way. Where would you say that things are at now in terms of, say, the fight to be informed, the fight to, have an accountable mega hospital planning process?
Well, there are consultations and engagements going on all the time. Opportunities to speak up about sprawl, about what kind of a community we want for the future, making the community safe for people of all ages. We have active transportation objectives in this city. We have budgets. So I think that there are lots of opportunities for people to speak up and engage with the city and bring up points. And I think that's what we need to do now. So every time there's an opportunity, we need to say, this is the city that I imagine. We need to be asking questions about the budget. How are we going to afford this? Do we want higher taxes? Do we want savings? My point is, well, environmentally, I don't think that we can afford it, but also financially, nobody wants higher taxes, and if we need to pay higher taxes in order to be able to afford more urban sprawl, we should be asking, like, are there better, more cost-effective ways to do this? So we have plenty of opportunities to ask questions and engage with councillors and talk about the community that we want.
Or are there other ways that we can maybe get revenue for the city that
For sure.
isn't tax revenue, right? So
That as well.
exploring other options too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, there's always so much I want to add. And I always think about the things afterwards. I think that there are, I'm very disappointed with where the city and the hospital are going with this, but I have not given up hope that we can come up with smarter answers. Over the years, we've had more progressive councillors who understand these issues. I'm hoping that the municipal election will bring several more enlightened councillors who will ask good questions. And I think that people are becoming more aware of some of the issues. I think also possibly the fact that the economy is not as certain as it may have appeared to be a couple of years ago, that's also something that's making us more aware of the need for smarter thinking. So I think that there's still hope to make smarter decisions.
Where do you think at this point the decision-making power lies?
Well, the provincial government is definitely in charge, and they have said that it's all a go, so that's important. I also see the mayor is asking the candidates to support this plan, so perhaps it's not as certain as he would like it to be. Otherwise, there'd be no need to ask the candidates to support the plan. I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, you're running in the election. Are you signing on to the mayor's plan?
No, I'm not. I think any space that doesn't open it up for discussion, like obviously folks have done, like I said, so much research into this and in talking to the community and everything, and the fact that you can be shut out of the process, and like you said, you have these logical arguments, it makes sense, let's talk about it, and it's just like, no, well, we've decided,
Yeah.
right? And this is such a block for people to make any headway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And actually have advance and have, move forward and have this progress
And
that we're
agency.
talking about. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we should never stop
Mm-hmm.
talking about because we talk about this being Windsor's worst planning mistake ever.
Mm.
And I think it truly is Windsor's worst planning mistake ever.
Mm-hmm.
So what we need to do is just never stop saying that,
Mm-hmm.
because you can approve it all you like, it doesn't make it any better.
Right.
And I do think it's really important for people to talk about what is being planned in downtown Windsor.
Mm-hmm.
So the plan for the Olette campus is certainly not set in stone.
Mm-hmm.
People need to speak up about that
Mm-hmm.
and ask questions. What are the services? And it's not just saying, oh, it's going to be an urgent care center that's going to be staffed by employees from the hospital. That's not the answer that we need. What kind of services are they going to provide? Or is it going to be a one-stop shop? Just think about the last time you went to the hospital for whatever reason. Is whatever you went there for, is that going to be dealt with at the urgent care center, or are you going to have to travel to the hospital for further care? How is that going to work?
Mm-hmm. That's important. I think everybody needs to be thinking about these things and how that affects them, but also their community. So
For sure.
thanks very much for joining me today and for having this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.